to see different types of football would be great, and to see how different coaches handle first team. And there's many aspects to coaching. It's not just the tactical side, it's the man management, it's everything, how you manage staff. And I think my other career in working for St. John Ambulance, in that sort of management sort of role, I already have that man management type of role outside of football, and that's kind of carried over into football as well. So using the other experiences to help my football is great.
Welcome to another episode of Across the Line. We've got a great episode for you today. We traveled to Australia. Well, we don't actually travel, but we check in with David Perkovic, former Kaya coach and longtime servant of the game. Has been coaching for a very long time and has plenty of insights, both of the game here and in Australia. And we get an opportunity to catch up with him. This was your former coach, Chris.
Yeah, it was really good to catch up with Dave. It's been a while since he's been on the Philippine football scene, so it was lovely to get a catch up with him, just finding out a little bit about his experiences in Australia, what he's currently up to, and then giving him an opportunity to give an account of his time here in the Philippines, which evidently he had a fantastic time. So I hope the listeners will enjoy this, because I think it's, again, a great insight into what it's like to be a coach in the Philippines.
Always perceptive, always eloquent in the way he delivers his messages. It's a fantastic listen, and we hope you enjoy it. If you do enjoy this episode, please do subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and on Twitter. Without further ado, we've got David Perkovic on the show. Enjoy. Today we are traveling down under with David Perkovic in Australia, old friend of both myself and Chris, and we get an opportunity to catch up today. So how's it going, Dave?
Very good. Obviously, like the Philippines, we're in quarantine here as well. So, the lack of football has been a bit of a struggle, but family's all healthy and well, and just trying to be patient as much as possible. Chris
Greatwich with us as always, this time in the kids' room today. How's it going over there, Chris?
Yeah, I've been bumped from the office. So I'm in my 2-year-old's bedroom, which is why we've got some of the balloons in the background. It's not my usual taste for decor, but yeah, I'm not as trendy as Dave with his album covers and whatnot in the background. But yeah, it's nice to see Dave looking well though. It's great to have you on. I know you've listened to quite a few of the episodes, and I know you've been quite active in doing some podcasts recently. So I just thought it would be a great opportunity for us to catch up with you, see what you're up to, and also reminisce over some of your, seminal moments that you had while you were here in the Philippines. It'd be nice to relive some of those moments, Dave.
My pleasure for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
So what's going on, Dave, with you at the moment? So you said you're in lockdown, but I know that Australia have talked about sort of easing some of the restrictions, and you said that potentially you guys might be going into training again next week.
Yeah, look, in Australia, our numbers have been quite low for a fair few days now, where we're only getting dribs and drabs of new viruses in the country. I think at the moment we've only got 500 confirmed cases right around the country. That still remains, so which is quite positive. And they know who they are, and we've got one of the best testing rates in the world. New South Wales, which is where I live in the state of Australia, has got the best testing in the world in terms of per capita for our state. So that's quite nice to be living in an environment that you have these kind of capturing these viruses. But yeah, restrictions are going to be eased on Friday, where we can start congregating in groups of 10. So we're expecting our footballing body, Football New South Wales, to make some recommendations on how we go back to training. And there's some rumours that we'll be able to do that in groups of 10 as of next week, but nothing confirmed yet, but that's what we're hoping for.
So talk to us a little bit about your current role, because obviously most of the listeners will know you from being the Kaya coach from a few years back, but you have a new role now. And do you want to talk to us about your current position at Spirit?
Sure. So at Spirit, I'm the first grade coach. So I coach the men's team, but I also am the senior technical director of the senior program, which includes 18s and reserve grade. Our club is quite professional in the sense that what they provide us in terms of ability to do our jobs well is fantastic. We have GPS monitors, we have athlete monitoring programs. We've got little apps on the players' phones where they wake up in the morning and tell us how they feel and whether they're feeling ill, whether they're feeling good, whether they're feeling sore, whether they're feeling injured, and it's got a little body on there to itemize which areas of the body that they're not feeling well.
Right.
We have one of the best sports scientists in the world as a consultant at our club, Dr. Craig Duncan. He was, with the Australian national team when we won the Asian Cup. I don't know if you saw any reports, but he's the genius that had these special glasses for when the Socceroos was flying around the world in World Cup qualifiers and everything else like that. So he's a genius of a person. So we have him as a consultant. What we know about our players is incredible. It's a fantastic place to be in.
And they play in the NPL, correct?
Yeah, we play currently. We're in the NPL 2, which is second level. The competition has changed a little bit from last year to this year. We had 14 teams in the competition. That's changed to 12. They wanted it a little bit like every league to have the same amount of teams. I was a little bit disappointed in that because it obviously reduces the number of games. But one of the positives was that they've increased the number of teams with the opportunity to get promoted and relegated.
Okay.
So there's 1.5 spots now available for promotion and obviously 1.5 to get relegation. So otherwise it's only one team that goes up, one team that used to go down previously.
And just in terms of like the Australian pyramid structure, that sits, so the NPL is one level
under the
down
A-League.
From the A-League. And then obviously that's then regionalised, correct? Across all of Australia, right?
That's right. So you've got every state that runs their own NPL. And at the end of the regular season, we have all the winners of the individual state NPLs that have a kind of a playoff to see who the national champion is in that second tier.
Yeah. And like one thing I noticed, because I had some friends who went over and played at the NPL level, and I think obviously different states have a different sort of level, I would say, in terms of how competitive I would envisage and imagine, judging by people who I've spoken to, that the New South Wales NPL network is one of the strongest. I mean, you probably say it is the strongest, right, across Australia. But there's a lot of players who are playing at that level who are more than capable of playing in the A-League. You know, they're probably to play at that level versus playing in the A-League because maybe they have another job or another career, or circumstances dictate that they can't commit to a full-time professional career in the A-League and opt to play at that level. But they are more than capable in terms of ability-wise to play at a higher level, but choose not to. So I think people need to understand that with the level that you're coaching at. It's a high standard.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the difference, it's a little bit strange in Australia. We don't have promotion relegation into the top tier as yet. There's a lot of talk about introducing that. But you're 100% right. You could have some players that's earning more in the second tier than in the first tier. And that's because of a combined income. So they might get it offered a entry-level role at A-League level, which is about $80,000, I think, roughly. And their combined income with football and outside of football could be 150, 200 grand. So they opt to play at that level where it's still very, very competitive, but obviously not professional. So still we train 3 times a week and then play on the weekend. So we're only really a couple sessions off being a professional environment in a lot of countries. But the standard is quite high. This season I had Jason de Jong joined from the Philippines, and he was quite surprised with the level of football that he was introduced at. So he said a lot of these players could play anywhere. He was comparing it to like third tier Dutch league. So it's quite a good standard.
So there are 8 other divisions, is that correct, in the NPL? in Australia?
So no, there's quite a bit. So just in New South Wales alone, you've got 4 tiers of NPL. So you've got NPL 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then in every other state, you've either got 1 or 2 or 3 tiers. So I'm pretty sure there's 3 tiers in Victoria, 2 tiers in Queensland, and 1 tier in every other state outside of Northern Territory.
Wow. That's a lot of competition. A lot of football
and you've got some really, really seasoned clubs in there as well. Like one of my friends, he was at Brighton with me, goalkeeper, and he went out and played for Melbourne Knights. And he said like he couldn't believe like there's such a historical club. Is it Croatian? Is it of Croatia? I think they're big Croatian.
Yeah,
right. So he was saying like historically, it's one of the, I think, is it the oldest or one of the biggest clubs in Australia, despite the fact they're not in the A-League.
Absolutely. So previous to the A-League, because the A-League's been running for about 15, 16 years. Previous to that, the National League was called the NSL. And a lot of these NPL clubs still feature in was in the NSL. So your Melbourne Knights, your Sydney United, your Marconis, your Sydney Olympics, they were huge clubs back then. And they're still quite considerable clubs now. Their member base is quite substantial, so they're still well followed. And that's why I think there's a lot of talk in Australia about trying to get this promotion relegation, because it gives these historical clubs an opportunity, potential opportunities to get promoted into the top tier.
Yeah. I think it's a really interesting setup, the Australian League, because obviously there are so many logistical factors that play into that as well. You know, that such a broad expanse of geography that you have to deal with, you know, which I'm sure logistically it makes it very difficult. So, I've said this for a long time, you know, a regionalised system, I think works best when you're faced with so many logistical difficulties. And one of the things that Jing and I have discussed on many occasions is when you're living in an archipelago like we are in the Philippines, that those, you know, what might seem like a short trip, it encompasses, right, you have to have a flight, you have to have hotels. What if your flights are delayed? You know, and all of these things become huge factors alongside other things like the cost, just the simple logistics of the cost of flying an entire team down to play a home and away game. And, you know, obviously we've gone back to that more regional format that you had when you were here in the Philippines. But it's just interesting to see how you guys in Australia have done it. And it seems like it's still a work in progress. And it'll be interesting to see how it kind of develops here in the Philippines, because I think that type of platform would work best with, you know, regional competitions converging on some sort of national championship. And as you alluded to, also it gives you that sense of community as well. You know, like I said, Melbourne Knights having that real strong connection with the Croatian contingent that are from that community. You know, I think it would be the same here in the Philippines if you had that, you know, people from Iloilo being, you know, having that sense of pride. If you're from Davao, having that sense of pride in your team from your community. But yeah, unfortunately, we sort of tried that model, didn't quite work, going back to a more regionalized setting now here in the Philippines. But I think in terms of a model, I think that moving forward, that'd be a nice thing for us to aspire to moving forward, because I think without that sense of community, I think it's going to be very hard for football to develop and football to grow here. So it's interesting to hear you discuss it and talk about it in Australia.
100%. I think it can be, in Australia, it was very much the pride and the demise of football, because the old NSL had its issues as well, which is why that was a flawed sort of program, right. and there was at times a little, with those communities being very passionate about their own communities, there was even some violence that entered the league at that point in crowds and everything else like that. So I think that's where kind of the A-League started, because every club was brand new, started from scratch. So, but now I think football's grown to a level where it has to embrace its history. We're at very much a crossroads in our football as well as the Philippines, where this virus obviously has put a spanner in the works in every league around the world, but financially our game has had a massive impact. So they're looking at they're taking this opportunity to look at what is the best way forward for football in this country. So in some instances, we share the same challenges.
I'm interested to know, Dave, like how many people come out to these matches for your games?
Yeah, it ranges. For my games, it's when we have club days, you could have, up to 1,000 people there, which is not too bad. But then you have some of these other clubs that we have a great competition called the FFA Cup, and FFA Cup crosses with all forms of the game. So you can have your social football team playing, you're competing. It's a very much similar like the FA Cup in England, where you have your lower tiers of competition and they battle that out in the early rounds. And if you somehow get through, you can play some of the bigger clubs. And then you've often have NPL teams playing against A-League teams. And when I first came home from the Philippines, I was fortunate enough to help out a local club here, Sydney United. They wanted me to help prepare them to play Sydney FC, which was an A-League club. And at that particular game, I think there was 15,000, 16,000 people watching that game. So you can have quite good crowds. And we have every game is on the first tier of NPL is live on YouTube, live on Facebook as well. So if you can't get out to the games, you can definitely watch it via those channels, online channels. So yeah, it's closely watched, and sometimes it's considered sometimes a little bit more passionate than the A-League as well, because you've got that sense of history with those clubs. So it's quite an interesting platform of football.
Yeah, as Chris mentioned, it is something that I'm really interested to see if it is possible at all to be able to set up the competitions that way regionally and be able to move, just have the champions of Iloilo go up against the champions of Bacolod, and then have the champions of Luzon play the champions of the teams in Laguna or something like that. I really do think that would be not only a good way to get communities involved, but to get the regional FAs used to the organization required in order to run these competitions, in order to get their acts together, so that on a national scale, it'll be so much quicker, the development, if all the regional FAs are capable of running their own competitions and dealing with all the issues that come with running competitions. It's not easy. So I really do think that's the way forward.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. It needs to be one top level down in terms of governance, because we have a problem in Australia where we have too many governing bodies that no one answers to each other. So you have the FFA who runs football on a national scale, but you have the state entities, so your different regions, if you rather, they don't necessarily have to follow what the FFA says. So they've got their own entity, their own board of directors. And so it's a little bit fractioned in that sense, and it's been like that for a long time. They do tend to work with each other more than ever now, but there's a lot of argument to say, the regional entities should be just following the program or following the wishes of the FFA and just running their programs in a regional sense. But, it's still like what we see in New South Wales, maybe a little bit different in Victoria. So to have that sort of one governing body saying this is how we're going to roll it, and everyone just following the guidance of one body, would be a lot more concurrent to progression.
One of the things that interests me a lot about Australia is that I've sort of seen the country become sort of like the Cinderella story, making it into the World Cup, to becoming a country that now expects to be in the World Cup on a regular basis, and being extremely disappointed when they don't qualify for the big stage. I'm sure the transition has been significant and fantastic to watch over there. What has it been like, over the last decade or so, watching this transition from becoming, sort of an outsider into an expectant entry into the World Cup?
Yeah, sure. So in 2006, we qualified for our first World Cup in 34 years, 36 years, something like that. So yeah, it was a long time in between drinks. So our first feature was a lot long ago. And then we had a playoff we had playoffs with the 5th ranked South American teams for a long time. And 4 years earlier, we lost to Uruguay in a playoff. And then 4 years later, we was fortunate enough to beat them on the second time. But the 2006 World Cup was fantastic for our country. It really gave football the boost that it really needed. 2006 was a fantastic World Cup in Germany. Not only we first qualified for a very long time, but we had a very difficult group. We had Brazil, Croatia, and Japan. At the time, Japan was the best in Asia. Croatia, obviously, it previously got in the top 3 in a World Cup, and obviously we all know how good Brazil is. So to even just get out of our group, which was amazing, to go 1-0 down against Japan in the first game, and then to win that game 3-1, and then losing to Brazil, then having to get a result against Croatia, and then drawing that game 2-2 was fantastic. And then obviously in the second round, we lost to Italy, who ended up being the champions, and we just lost to 1-0 in extra time. So it was a fantastic time to be in Australia and being a football fan. Then after that, obviously, we entered Asia because we were previously in Oceania, and then it became a whole lot harder. Before, to get into that playoff, all we needed to do was beat New Zealand pretty much. All the rest of the teams weren't nowhere near New Zealand or Australians level. So to go into Asia was a fantastic opportunity for Australia to have regular good competition games, and it really gave us an opportunity to really develop our football. And we're finding out that Asia is very, very difficult, and there's a lot of countries that's, the money that they put into their programs is incredible, and we can't match it, to be honest. But we're finding ways to still compete and still be quite high up and still to expect to get to World Cups, but it's getting harder and harder. And that level of competition is what you need to progress, because if it's always too easy to get there, you're never going to progress as a nation. So that pathway has been fantastic. And, we've had a few nail-biters to get into World Cups since 2006, but we're fortunate that we've been in every World Cup since 2006. So hopefully that continues to happen. But the Asian Cup is another fantastic opportunity for our nation to compete at. And obviously winning it on our home turf was a fantastic occasion as well.
What has been the key, you think, in terms of the development inside the game that's driven you? Obviously the competition moving into Asia is a big deal, but the quality seems to be progressing all the time as well. What do you think has been the key to that in the Australian game?
Well, I think a lot of Australians might disagree that our quality is increasing. A lot of Australians are thinking it's actually going backwards. But we had this golden generation era in 2006 where we had Harry Kewell, Mark Viduka, a lot of Marco Bresciano, Vince Grella. They all played in top leagues in the world. Our starting 11, most of them will be playing either English Premier League, Serie A. We even had a couple of players that featured in La Liga as well. So since then, we don't have that many playing in top-tier competitions anymore, and that's been disappointing. Whilst our mid-tier has improved, our top tier has probably come down a notch. We only have 2 players in the English Premier League, in Matty Ryan and Aaron Moy. So to try and get a few more, I think in a way, with the money that's available in Asia, a lot of players are taking that easy option to go to Asia instead of really battling out in Europe. And, Europe is the standard that you need to be at if you want to be the best. But a lot of Australians are deciding to go to China, to go to, Middle East or something like that to get big paychecks, which is available to them. So instead of, you had Harry Kewell that left our nation at a very young age, I think it was 14, 15, to go over to England to try and succeed, and Mark Viduka going in his early 20s to go over to Croatia, then to Scotland, then to England. So you had that, they were battle hardened, whereas it's a little bit too easy now to make money from the game, whereas we didn't back in those days. We didn't have a professional game here, so the only way you could be a professional is if you left Australia. And I suppose once those guys made that top tier, they lived through hardship, and that's really was a blessing to them in terms of their football. Now we have this issue where our middle tier, as I said, is getting better, but our top tier is not as good. But we've introduced a curriculum here in Australia, which was a good starting point. It needs to be refreshed. But the technical abilities of our younger players are getting better. But we were always known to be a nation that were very physical in our football. And when the curriculum came in, we had no focus on physicality anymore, and it was all about technique. And, generations are changing now. Kids are more in front of computers now than ever before. They're not outside climbing trees, climbing fences like we were when we were kids. So they don't have that natural ability to be physical. So that needs to be put into our programs, where we never used to have to do that. So at our club, that's one thing that we are very focused on, is making sure that our our youth players are physically able to battle and avoid injury and things like that. So it is a challenge to find where you're at, but it's a fine balance to working on technique and making sure that physically we're up to it. But we need to embrace our strengths and also develop our weaknesses.
It's quite interesting you say that, Dave. I read an article. I think it was written by, or it was interviewed. It was Danny Tiato. And he was saying that exactly what you were saying. He said it's when his crop of players came through the system, they were going to, he was at Man City for a while, when the Premier League was, with the likes of Man United, Chelsea, Liverpool fighting for Champions League. It was probably the peak Premier League era. And he was there. He said the Vidukas, the Cures and these types of players. And, there doesn't seem to be as many of those types of players anymore. Certainly not the Premier League. It was Matty Ryan and Aaron Moore at my old club Brighton. So I see those. But Matty Ryan's a top goalkeeper. But I look at, the Australia needs to be inundated with top Australian goalkeepers in the Premier League. Your Mark Schwartzers, for example, and you just don't seem to have as many of those guys. And I totally agree. Like I see a lot of the Australians there plying their trade in some of these other Asian countries and then perhaps potentially taking the easy route out. And while that's great on an individual level, that probably hasn't filtered through to, expanding the quality at the top end with the national team. But what differences have you noticed off the back of Danny Tiato's comments and the ones that you've just said there? What have you noticed in terms of the change in mentality? Like, do you think, is it just a generational thing? Is it just a case of evolution dictates that the type of player that you're creating is going to be different? Because I think very similar. I think the Philippines should be creating its own model based upon the type of players that we can produce, based on the physical composition of the player, based on the mental composition of the player. And like you said, Australians typically, if you look at most other sports, they dominate, rugby, cricket, they have that winning mentality. And that seems to be lacking a little bit from the type of player that I'm used to seeing and envisaging as my kind of archetypal, prototypical Australian player that I had in my mind based on what I would see as I grew up watching the Premier League in that era.
Absolutely. Look, if speaking from that golden generation, you had two players in particular I remember seeing interviewed was Vince Grella and Marco Bresciano, who played 10 more years in the Serie A.
Serie A, yeah.
And their coaches, I remember they interviewed one of their coaches at Parma at the time, and I was obviously a lot younger when they were there, but I'll never forget that what they said. So what do you like about these Australian players the most? He goes, they're animals. They're absolutely machines, and we're not that anymore. The last probably machine that we've produced, I can comfortably say, is Mile Jedinak. Who was captain of Crystal Palace, who's now retired. Growing up, I played with his brother. He was a couple of tiers younger than me, and I got to see his development. And to be honest, as a youth player, he was terrible. He wasn't great at all. But I never met a guy that worked harder than this guy. He was just absolutely determined to succeed. And that's the essence of what Australians used to be.
Yeah.
They just had this never say die attitude, and he embraced it so much. And I'll never forget a 2006 World Cup. I was managing, funnily enough, a musical band at the time, and they wrote the theme song to Australia's campaign to the World Cup. And he was at this club where they were playing, and I got to speak to him, and I said, "How's things going?" He goes, "Good." He was obviously a young lad at the time, and he was traveling every single day from southwestern Sydney to Central Coast, which is an hour and a half trek there, and just one way. And he was training with Central Coast Mariners for no money, nothing at all, just training every day for about 6 months. And he ended up getting a contract, and not long after that, about a year or so after that, he became captain, and then all of a sudden he was overseas, and his hard work really paid off. And he embodied that physical nature of what Australians used to be like. But yeah, it is a generational thing. I think Australian kids are not like what they used to be. So instead of just trying to reproduce what we had before, I think we've got to create a new version of what an Australian footballer is. Technically, they are getting better. And I feel that our coaching is getting better at a better level now as well. There's better coaches around. Whether it's available at youth level across the platform, I don't know. But I know there's better coaches at youth level than when I played. So they have that ability to be there. But I think we need to develop players' mentality more than anything. I think younger kids are taking the easy option out a little bit too early these days, and but I can understand there's a lot of money available in Asia, and it can set you up for life. So it's a good carrot to dangle in front of players. But you've got the Matty Ryans of the world who is just determined to actually succeed at the top, and he's not the tallest goalkeeper, and to be a success in the English Premier League is a credit to his mental ability to overcome setbacks.
Yeah, I mean, you talk a lot about philosophy there, Dave, and I want to segue a little bit out of the Australian national team and the Australian system and talk a little bit more about your philosophy, because one of the things that I really took from you when you first came through the door, when you signed up with Kai, was this real sense of, this is my philosophy, this is how I believe the game should be played, and I'm going to implement this style of play with the players that I have at my disposal. And me as a player, I really enjoyed playing under that system, but I'd just like to know where that kind of philosophy came from. Like, I know you're a huge Barca fan, and I know you're heavily influenced by Johan Cruyff, but what was it about that style of play that it sort of inspired you and made you want to create teams in that image?
It's a very good question. Maybe when I started coaching, I was a little bit naive, and that worked to my credit, to be honest. I had this, like as you mentioned, I am a massive fan of FC Barcelona. I started supporting them not in the Pep Guardiola era. It was the Johan Cruyff era. I was a very young child at the time when I started watching them. I was a striker, and what drew me to FC Barcelona was Romario and Stoichkov. Little strikers. I'm not a big guy. Maybe in the Philippines I'm more bigger than that. But in Australia, I was always the shortest by at least a head, because we've got some pretty big footballers out here. So and I modelled my game off those guys. So I used to watch those guys, and I started getting encapsulated in their style of play, which I'd never seen before. Australia back then was very direct, a little bit more like the old English style. And then I saw something different. And I suppose that stayed with me all my kind of life. And being this little sort of striker, I didn't have the ability to, power my way through. So I had to work intelligently as a footballer. And I guess I was very fortunate. Some would say unfortunate, but for me, I look at things a little bit differently. I was fortunate that injury ruined my playing career at a very early age, and I got into coaching very early. I started coaching at 24. And I suppose around that sort of time is when Pep re-emerged the Barcelona of old, and seeing that style of football really drawed me to it. And what drawed me to it more than anything is the ability to beat the opposition with your mind first, before your football. So, to make the opposition to play differently in accordance to the way you play you've already won the game. So if your ability to keep the ball surpasses the opposition, then they're going to have to try and break what they normally do, which makes them weaker, to then try and combat you, and that only plays to your strengths. So I suppose that's one of the things football is about one ball, and if you have it, you have a greater chance of dictating what happens in the game.
And how did that evolve over time? Because you said you started at 24, going into full-time coaches. What sort of level were you working with at that age?
Yeah, I was working at third tier of football at under 14s level.
Right.
And then I quite fortunately, I quickly came up in the ranks. So the very next year, I took 2 teams on. I'll never do that again. But I took a 16s team on in second tier and a reserve grade team. So I was training 2 sets of sessions a night. So the 16s followed by the reserve grade. And then the very next year, I coached top tier for the state at under 18s level. And then I took a little bit of a step back because I knew the environment wasn't right for me there. So I went back to second tier level coaching reserve grade, coached there for a year and a half. And then I think it was 2011, I got my first grade gig. I was 29 years old. I had this, I think I backed myself naively back then. I really believed in what I was able to achieve as a coach. And I had this sense of bringing players on the journey with me. And it was something fresh to these players because Australian football wasn't known for the way I envisaged football. So they got to see something different. They came on the journey. And then not long after that, I obviously got the opportunity to come to the Philippines, which was really, for me, career-defining because in that time that I was in the Philippines, I didn't have another job outside of football, obviously. And my time away from the football pitch, I really started developing my idea of how to develop tactically the way football should be played. So what it is even now is way surpassed, my time at Kaya. So, but I would never be where I envisage football now, where I am, if I didn't have that time in the Philippines. So I'm forever grateful for that opportunity.
How did it come about, Dave? Because I know a little bit about the story of how it came about, but I don't know the full Dave Perkovic version. So how did you end up here in the Philippines?
So my first gig in 2011, I coached a team called Fraser Park. I took over a relegation team mid-season, and we battled it out to survive that year. And in that team, I had 3 Japanese players, and one of them was Masanari Oromura. So Masa, at that time, barely spoke any English. But for some reason, I didn't know it at the time, but he took a real liking to my coaching philosophy and my style of coaching and possibly my man in management, even though we couldn't really speak that much. I suppose he just liked my mannerisms and the way I conducted myself. But just one odd chance, one afternoon, I got a message on Facebook from Masa saying, "Hey, Perko, how are you? Are you interested in coaching in the Philippines?" I said, my first response was, "Masa, who's typing this for you?" He goes, "I've learned English." But yeah, so he asked me if I was interested in applying for the job. And I said, "Look, I'm interested to know more about it." And he asked me to send my resume to Paul and Justin at the time, who was running the club. And yeah, I did that, and almost immediately I got an email back wanting to tee up a Skype interview. And yeah, I'll never forget, part of the process of my interview was they asked me to analyse a football match, and it was a Champions League game between Barcelona and AC Milan. And I was like, oh, this is right up my alley to analyse Barcelona. So I gave them my feedback on the game. Obviously, it impressed them enough to offer me the job.
Super interesting, that one. That's two of their favorite teams too, if I'm not mistaken, Barcelona and AC Milan. So it's just an analysis of the game. Was it a real-time analysis of the game, or
no? It was post-match because obviously it was. I got to watch the game in that morning. I think it was around 6:30. Champions League games happened in Australia, and then that afternoon I had to give my feedback on the game, and I still remember my opinions of the game. And it was that era where Cesc Fabregas and Xavi and Iniesta was in the same lineup, and they could never quite make it work. And that particular game, you had in the midfield, you had Busquets, you had Xavi and Cesc Fabregas. And in the front three, you had Pedro. Messi was playing as a false nine, and he had Iniesta on the left wing. And my argument at the time was Fabregas was playing the left side of the midfield three, and you had Iniesta playing the left wing. And my opinion at the time was Iniesta likes to drift in off the left side, and Fabregas is a running midfielder. He likes to get forward. He kind of adapted his game from growing up in Spain and being in Arsenal and English football. He liked to get forward, whereas Xavi kind of likes to sit a little bit deeper as a playmaking midfield. And it's like they should have just swapped him and Xavi over, because then Cesc Fabregas will be allowed to come inside, and Iniesta will be allowed to come inside, and Xavi won't invade his space, and then Iniesta could have that ability to take that space because Fabregas wasn't occupying it. And then you have Pedro, who used to hug the wing a little bit more on the opposite side, and Fabregas will be able to drive into that half space a little bit more effectively. But yeah, that was my opinion. My analysis of that game I'll never forget.
So then I remember you came probably 3 or 4 games into the season. We'd had a coaching change really early on in the season, and you came in. My
first game was you were in charge.
Very loosely. I don't want to say I was in charge. Yeah.
But you're kind of caretaking.
I was handling stuff.
And I only came in one session before the game. And I said to you, look, you run the team the way you think it should be run, and then I'll get a feel for the game. And if I need to change anything at halftime, I'll see it from the sideline and I'll go off the whim there. So you ran that session, and I was just kind of observed because all I got to see was very little of the team before arriving.
Was it the day before a game? Was it the day before a game?
It wasn't the day. The session was the day before the game.
Right. So it was just a walkthrough, wasn't it? Really.
Correct.
The day before,
it was very, very obviously light load. I arrived there the night before, and I got to see a game at
McKinley. You came down, right?
McKinley Hill, Imparts Stadium, and that was my first eye opener to Philippines football. And then we're playing Army.
Yeah,
was my first game. It was round 6, and I can't remember if we were winning 1-0 or if we were losing 1-0 at half-time. I think we were
winning.
I think we were winning 1-0, but we weren't playing well. No. We weren't playing well.
Yeah, we weren't playing well.
And I think I tweaked a few positional stuff at half-time, and we ended up winning 3-0, but still it wasn't a great performance, but it was an improved second half, and then from there it started. And I think that the rest of that season we only lost one game, and that was against Stallion,
who ended up winning the league.
Yes.
Right? What was your sort of first impressions in those formative weeks and months of being in the Philippines? Like, did you find it a real culture shock? Was it what you expected, or did you go in there completely with eyes wide open, let's just see what happens, just try to soak it all in and enjoy the adventure?
Yeah, it was a little bit like that. I suppose, I don't know, I consider myself quite adaptive to my environment. Whilst I can be very fixated on what I think football should look like. In terms of culture, I embrace the Philippine culture a lot. I loved my time there. I think the people were fantastic. Obviously, I had the Tolentinos looking after me like I was one of their own, and I am forever grateful for that. They made me feel at home, and the players were a joy to coach. Obviously, my time there, the squad kind of changed quite considerably from when I arrived to when I departed. But I would like to think that the team improved over that period of time. But yeah, it was in terms of culture of the country, I loved living there. It was fantastic. The players, the football was interesting. obviously McKinley Hill had this. It was a compact stadium and a very tight areas. It was a small field. I would have loved to have an opportunity to coach on the bigger fields. I think the style of football I like to play would have been enhanced playing at a couple of the bigger stadiums where the dimensions of the field is a lot bigger. So, yeah, you have a lot more space. But yeah, we're able to impose the philosophy there, and it was some really great highlights in that time period.
What did you think of the level when you got here? Was it what you expected? Better, worse? What was your sort of?
To be honest, I didn't know what to expect, so I didn't have a idea. To be honest, I had an idea that the level would have been higher than I was currently coaching. And whilst I probably would say it was, I think it was not necessarily from a technical aspect, because whilst you had some players like yourself, quite technical, and you had some players that came in from overseas. In my first season, there was very little, if any, restrictions on foreign players. So you had a lot of quality players that came in Philippine football at that era. So there was a lot of technical players there, but I wouldn't say the difference was technically. It was probably fitness, because I was coaching semi-pro, training 3 times a week. And whilst, the fitness levels of Australia at that level has improved immensely, the speed of the game was quite incredible. And I think parts of that was because it was pro footballers training every day, but the other part of it, I think, was because of the smaller field. You're only covering small distances. So it was almost like a 11-11 version of futsal. It was because the areas were so tight, you can cover distance quite quickly. So it was adapting to those environments.
Yeah,
it
was quite an interesting. Like, trying to recall that first period that you were there, because I even sometimes you look at coaches and you think they work in sort of segments, and I even look at your time, it was quite segmented, even though you're only there for a short period of time. Like that first period that you were there, you had this squad that you knew ultimately we were probably going to get rid of almost everybody. Like, I remember having a meeting with you, it was almost halfway through the season, you were like, Chris, half the squad's going to go. Right? Yes. Because it's not, one, they're players who don't fit my philosophy. 2, we're just carrying too much dead weight. So we're going to completely. And I even remember there was like sessions where it would just be a fight club, because people just we want to get a new contract, and it was pretty hairy at times, because the intensity was arguably higher than it was in the games, which I think was quite hard for you to manage. It was really quite hard for you to manage, because obviously you're trying to watch it as a coach, and you're sort of withdrawn from it. But I remember being in it thinking, oh my God, I've got to perform in this training session. Otherwise, it's going to be a big problem, because people are after.
And there was challenges flying in. I remember a couple of games in, I think you guys started off pretty poorly in one of the games, and at halftime I let it rip. I said, you guys are willing to kill each other at training, but you're not willing to kill your opposition. Just remember, you're fighting for what's the badge on your shirt. And obviously we saw a change in the second half, but it was quite a unique experience that first season. Yes, there was a lot of good people there, and obviously one thing I took away from that experience of that first season is the willingness of a pro football willing to fight for their contract. And you could see that in the training sessions. Yeah. They were like, I'm going to really try my hardest to play on the weekend because I want to earn my contract for next season. But yeah, there was a lot of players that didn't really fit the mold, whilst there were. And what people don't necessarily realise is that if a coach doesn't select you moving forward or whatever, it doesn't mean you're not a good player. You just might not be a decent player in that type of team that the coach is trying to formulate. So I think that happened with a lot of our players at that time. And then obviously the rules changed as well. We had visa issues as well. So that's why a lot of the players had to go as well. So, it definitely was different periods within that year and a half that I was there. It was quite interesting.
Because the second year was completely different. Like, I look back to that team. Then we had that little cup run, didn't we? Because it was kind of broken down into 2 seasons. We had the cup run where we got beat in the. I think you weren't there. I think you went back to get your license, finish your license or something. So you weren't there. We lost the Air Force, and so that was like 2-3 months completely wasted off the back of a ridiculous result. Really huge disappointment for us. I think Morocco ended up winning the cup, which was a travesty. And then you basically set about rebuilding the team for your first fully fledged season. And all I can remember from that campaign was the first time I really felt like, right, we've got a genuine chance here. I feel like we've got pieces of the puzzle in place. I feel like you've had enough time to embed some of your ideas, and then you've brought in players who can fit your style of play. Obviously, at the time, you carried yourself as, look, no, we've got a chance here. But did you genuinely believe that was a team that was capable of winning the title that season?
Yeah, I think trying to take it back a little bit, my first period of the season where we had what we had and then the window opened. So I see my period as the very first initial part of when I took over till halfway through the season of the first season. Yeah. Then in that mid-season window, we signed some players like Fabian Lewis, Daniel Delaney, the players that came in. And then that second half of the season was the second period. And then we had that cup period, and then we had that final season.
Four different periods, basically.
Yeah, exactly, within a year and a half. So it was quite incredible. It seems a lot longer than that when you look at it into those periods. But in entering that season in 2014, I think entering that league, I was very confident with our starting 11. But I knew if key players got injured, we didn't have depth like some of the other clubs did. But I knew our starting 11 could be the best starting 11 of any other team in that competition. I suppose where part of the problem came in is that we had a severe injury to Richard Greer. He did his ACL, and that moved you back into that 6 role, and then I was missing something in that 8 role that you were playing in that second season. And then we obviously had Pablo broke his arm, and so he missed a period of that season as well, and he was our highest goal scorer. But what could have happened if those 2 players played, because they were very important to the way we played. Obviously a number 9 is very important, and you don't have too many visa players, and there were 2 of the visa players that were there. And whilst the local players, the Filipinos, are the core of what you do, you try to fill in the visa players in where you're weak in your team. So I felt that our starting 11 could beat anyone, and we had some great performances. Like I remember that we played Global, and that second game was, I think it was the second or third game, and we were really hard done by because we were absolutely annihilating in that first 10 minutes, and then OJ got wrongfully red carded, and it wasn't a decision where the referee, he did make a mistake, but he got a mistake in the rules of the game, where he handballed the ball and sent him off where it's supposed to be just a yellow card. So I think that kind of, gave Global the upper hand, and from there we really couldn't get a grasp of it again. So, but we had some really fantastic performances. I remember twice we came back from behind, I think it was in the first season, but against Global we were 2-0 down after 10 minutes, and we ended up winning those games 3-2. There were quite some memorable games. And then probably the most memorable goal was your goal against Archers. Where I'll never forget it. The ball came across and you did an overhead kick and it went in the back of the net and you went mental. You ran more in your celebration than in the game.
That sounds about right, yeah. I remember that game. It's quite funny. I remember that game for a number of different reasons, and the overhead kick is probably not the most memorable thing about that game. I was playing 6 for Dave at that time, and Massa was number 10, believe it or not. So Massa was playing number 10. And I don't know what conspired during the course of that game, but after about 60 minutes, I ended up playing number 10 for some reason. I don't know if Massa had to move back for an injury. Oh no, was that when he got his head injury or something happened anyway? But I ended up having to play number 10 for a while.
Actually,
was that it? Right, something like that.
Yeah,
right? I think that might have been when his head, because he was definitely off. He was on the side because he was celebrating when I scored the goal, and I've got the picture.
Correct.
But I ended up moving into number 10, and I scored 2 goals in like 15 minutes. I was like, dear, I told you, Dave, I've got to play here. And then, but obviously we score in the 93rd minute, and you think you're going to score the winning goal, but of course no, we don't. We concede one in the 94th minute straight from the freaking free kick. So no, it was going back to your. I mean that because that was the first season, and that was a really fond memory. But I can remember in that second or your first full season, shall we say, in 2014, I remember that global game, and even though we lost it, I remember everyone thinking, okay, Kaya's legit. Kaya's got hard done by there, and they're going to be a big problem for everyone. Like you could definitely get that feeling. And then I think we beat Global maybe in the second round, and then I think we beat Loyola. We beat Loyola in first or the end, going into the last
round.
Yeah, I thought we played 3 rounds. I thought we played 3 rounds in that.
Could have been, could have been.
So I think it was the end of one of the rounds, and I remember we were like a point behind Global, and I was like, "We're on it here. We've got a really good chance." And I thought we built really good momentum. Pablo was on fire. Pablo was a great sign, and he was on fire. Rich was, because he had a bit of a slow start. Rich, because I remember he felt as though centre backs weren't giving him the ball, and he wasn't able to dictate the tempo, and then it sort of took him a bit of time for the centre backs to trust him. And obviously once he found his rhythm, he was best 6 in the league by a mile. So we had those components of the team firing really, really well, and I just felt, no, we've got this league, and if we can continue to build on this momentum, I thought we were gonna win it. I don't know if you remember that week where Rich did his knee, Pablo broke his arm, but I also got injured in the Stallions game as well. I got a horrific tackle by Diop. I still got the scar on my leg. Yep. And I remember I actually, so that was all within the space of a week. So that might have been within the space of 3 games of each other, because we would often play Wednesdays, Saturdays. Yeah. And then we played 3 subsequent games off the back of that. So that Stallions game where I had to get stretchered off, we drew. And I think we lost to Green Archers 3-2 in it was an awful game. Yeah. And then because we dropped points in those 2 games and the shortened season, it just meant that we were out of the running at that point. Yes. And with those key players out, we just weren't able to make up the ground. And I think it was a really sad way to finish, because we were on such a positive note. Yes. Going into that final round.
And whilst you weren't out for that long, but even when you came back, you were able to play, but you weren't 100% for a while. Yeah. So we were probably only seeing a 60% Chris Greatwich as opposed to 100%. But, off the back of what you're saying about Rich, I know part of Rich's success was a lot down to you, because, I remember when he came into training, he told me this probably after my reign, a long time after, when he first couple of sessions in here, and obviously you get to know who's who in the squad pretty quickly, and he knew your background quite a lot, and then he saw how you grafted in football games and in training, and he was like, well, I can't, because I think he got in the comfort zone in Australia because he was virtually A-League quality, and he got his osteitis pubis that forced him out of the top tier, and then he was playing second tier, and he was just in second gear in second tier. And then when he came over, he probably still had that mentality, but then he saw Chris Greatwich like busting his backside to, in training sessions and in games. And he goes, well, this guy's achieved way more than me. I have to work hard. And that's when he started really ramping it up, and started demanding more off the centre backs, and got in, I suppose, like coming to a new country and adapting to a new footballing environment. It's never going to happen straight away. But I felt that all the foreigners, especially Pablo, the guy was incredible. Yeah. and everyone was scared of him, especially Loyola. I remember every time he was on the pitch. I remember in the very last game of the season, he was his first game back from his broken arm, and he was on the bench. And they went 2-0 up or something, and then he came on, and the game completely changed. They just were so scared of him. But yeah, good memories.
Yeah, I think one of the overriding themes that I had in my time, probably more so with you than any other, was totally agree with the whole best 11. We're the best 11 in the league, in my opinion. If we'd have kept the best 11 out on the pitch every game, I think we would have won at least one, maybe two league titles in that period. Yes. That's just my opinion. I always felt we had maybe a cup and a league title. I just felt like we didn't have the strength in depth. You know, I know that you're only there for a year and a half. Is that something that you found frustrating in your time here? And did that have any sort of bearing on the duration that you stayed here, or was it more of a case of your family circumstances dictating that you had to call time on your Philippine adventure?
Definitely the number one reason was my wife and I were at an age where if we were going to start a family, we were going to do that fairly soon. And, you know, it was very much my decision to come home to start family because I wanted my kids to be born in the country that I was born in. So that was probably the biggest reason why I come home. I suppose the only frustrating part of my time in the Philippines, and it was just the time period of Philippine football and what the club was able to do, is that, you know, now I look at Philippine football, and I looked at even when you were in charge of Kaya, and I looked at all your staff on the sidelines, and I was like, geez, what I would give to have that, because I was by myself. I didn't have any assistant coaches. All I had was a physio, and you had no sounding board. And whilst you had some players that are fantastic in the level that they played, i.e. yourself, it felt always a little bit uncomfortable having a sounding board as a player, because it's just not a normal situation. So if I was able to have some staff, I think the level of training sessions would have been able to one thing I've learned from my experience in Kaya is that whilst I felt that definitely my strength, as we talked about earlier, was my philosophy and my tactical side of things. I felt that I could improve a lot in terms of my training sessions. But, you know, what I had to kind of forgive myself for is that I was only limited to what one person could do. So that was the biggest challenge in terms of training. You had 22 players and one coach. Or sometimes in that first season, we had 25, 26, 27 players. And the rest. Massive squad. So yeah, I suppose it kind of was a little bit disappointing that I didn't actually get to get a title or something like that before I left. But that's the way life is sometimes.
What was your fondest memory that you took back with you from your time here in the Philippines?
He's already said, Jing. He said my overhead kick was the greatest moment of his whole time.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
To be honest, for footballing memory moments, probably those two global games, losing 2-0 to, at the time, they were the biggest club in the country in terms of, you know, they were flying it when I arrived. And I think it was only my third or fourth game in where we played global, and we beat Army, and then we didn't really have any difficult games leading up to that game. And that was the first real tester. And I remember being on the sideline being a bit nervous, and the game started, and after 10 minutes we were down 2-0. But we found, I think in that first game, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, did you score it before halftime? Can't remember.
I know I scored in one of them. It was a penalty, but I think that was the second. I think that was the second game.
Could have been OJ, actually.
I don't think I scored in the first game. I remember Berkey scoring on a two off of a couple of really bad defensive errors, and he capitalised.
I think you're right. That was the first goal. So we scored right before halftime. And then that halftime team talk was so much easier because we got back into the game. And then second half, there was only one team that was going to win the game, even though we were still behind. There was only one team trying to win it. And that was us. And that was quite memorable. And I remember before that game, I'll never forget, I think it was Justin come up to me about 5 minutes before kickoff. And I hadn't met Santi yet, who's obviously financed Kaya, the owner, one of the owners. And Justin came up to me 5 minutes before the game. After this game, we're going to Santi's birthday. I was like, okay. And I was like, Derby, geez, I don't want to lose this one. Didn't want to meet the owner of the club first time and coming off after a loss. So that added to the nerves on the sideline a bit. But it was a fantastic and up until that point, I don't think Kaya beat Global in the past 2 seasons or 3. Some stupid statistic. I remember going into that game and we came from 2-0 behind to win 3-2. And the second game that we played them, and it was almost a mirror image of the first game. We just scored before, and it was your penalty before halftime. And you could see going into the change room that they were like, we can't let what happened in the first game happen again. And we already knew that the game was ours because their mindset, they were already defeated before, second half even started. So, those 2 moments stand out the most. But I suppose in terms of a personal satisfaction, in terms of my job, I think the style of football from when I entered to when I left was definitely, you could see I had my influence on that team in terms of the style of play.
So you went back to Australia after that, started a family.
Yes.
Got back into coaching as well. What did you take with you from your time in the Philippines and you implemented over there?
Yeah, look, I had this newfound belief. I was always very confident in my ability of my vision of football, but I think the Philippines overall, that experience, and it's not just the football, just me as a human being living in another country, the challenges of being away from my wife because she only flew in and flew out basically, the time period that I was there. And it really grew me as a human being, that experience, and made me a lot more resilient. So it gave me a new sense of belief that I can do this. Coming back to Australia, my first coaching job afterward was a disaster. It's the only coaching gig that I've ever left. And so that wasn't great. So, coming off a high of coaching overseas and coming back home and experiencing a disaster gave me, I suppose, a sense of reality, because I came back thinking, I'm invincible, I suppose, a little bit. I've coached overseas. I can do this, and coming back home and that first experience really put my feet back on the ground. And since I've started coaching, and this is my 4th season at Spirit now, the type of football that we're playing now is fantastic. It's really, taking off on a different level, and our tactical side of things is really, really enhanced, and our training sessions has gone to another level. We've got psychologists, we've got sports scientists, we've got analysts at the club, and it makes my job so much easier in terms of giving the players vision of what they're able to achieve, and is fantastic, and it's really setting me up for my next opportunity in professional football whenever that may happen.
Is that what you want to do, Dave? Because one of the things I'm really interested when I speak to coaches is like, obviously, I'm imagining that you have quite a lot of say within the club if you have a TD type position, as well as being on the staff of the men's team.
Yeah.
Is that something that you enjoy, having that level of responsibility, or would you kind of rather hone in on one particular aspect of whether it be a TD or whether a head coach? And how do you see that kind of progressing as you move forward through your coaching journey?
Sure. Whilst I've been coaching quite a long time now, I'm still relatively young in terms of the coaching ranks because I'm only 38. So I have a lot of energy to coach a team. That's where my passion lies at the moment. I do enjoy having that dual role at the moment because I have a lot of influence. We do have a head of football, but he kind of looks after everything from 16s down. But we definitely feed off each other in terms of because I started before him in his role, and I started the implementation of the philosophy. And then when he came in, he just jumped on the back of that. And really, together, we've taken it to a new level. We really got bought into. We had club days where we had all the coaches in and really developed the philosophy. We even had AIS coaches come in, look at what we're doing, and given their recommendations on things. So we've been quite open with what we do, and I've shared stuff with you in terms of our player behaviours that we've developed. Having that dual role is quite good because then you have an influence of how the rest of the club looks like, because you end up wanting to produce your own players for your first grade. And, we want to produce players not just for our first grade, but for professional football. But, my ambition's to coach, first team football in a professional environment again. Whilst I'm very thankful for the position that I have, and it's allowed me to grow even further, I do have that burning desire to be a first grade coach. I think in maybe 20 years' time, that TD role will be better suited to me when I've, kind of fed all my, all my experiences in first team coaching. I think there will be a period of my career that I would like to be just a TD. But at the moment, my full focus is coaching on, a first team environment.
Yeah, I'm always really interested with that one, Dave, because there's always every year there's hundreds, thousands of coaches who come onto the market, so to speak, and everyone has the same aspirations. We all want to coach at the highest level, and I'm always intrigued to see where people's passions lie, because, especially with someone like yourself, when you've got such a clear vision and such a clear philosophy and identity with how you want things to be done, sometimes it's hard to relinquish that control, because if you have that image in your mind what it should look like, and you have the capacity to do it on quite a grand scale, sometimes it's quite hard when you have to work with a general manager or a sporting director. Well, no, this is the philosophy of the club. We don't quite see it as aligned as you. And sometimes in pursuing something that you might perceive to be the holy grail, sometimes it's not as enticing or as encompassing as you perhaps would like it to be, because you're bound by the constraints of a club or their philosophy or their guidelines or whatever. So I'm always quite intrigued to see where people stand within that sort of those margins, and how they really see where their strongest suits lie.
Yeah, look, I completely agree with you, and to some respects, I've already experienced that. One of the clubs that I've coached that in Australia, I kind of want to implemented this philosophy on the first team and get the club on board, and I kind of didn't really get the bites from the guys who ran the club as well as I would have expected, and it's no wonder that kind of, because I'm quite assertive when it comes to my beliefs on football, and I definitely have to fit in the environment, but I'm very much open to experiencing new things, and my journey as a coach is is only scratching the surface, the way I see it. Whilst I have very fixated ideas on the way I would run a team, it doesn't mean I would want to experience different experiences either. So I know potentially my next move might be going into an assistant coach, which I've never really have done before, except that brief period when I first came back from overseas. So to see different types of football would be great, and to see how different coaches handle first team. And there's many aspects to coaching. It's not just the tactical side, it's the man management, it's everything, how you manage staff. And I think my other career in working for St. John Ambulance, in that sort of management sort of role, I already have that man management type of role outside of football, and that's kind of carried over into football as well. So using the other experiences to help my football is great. And if I have the opportunity to be an assistant coach, like yourself with the national team being under different coaches, you get to see different things. And then in the back of my head, I'll say, okay, how would this work against me? If I was to implement my own philosophy, how can I value add into what I believe in? And you take different ideas from everywhere and make it your own. So it's all about that growth as a human being and as a coach. You can take from experiences.
Yeah. And would that be in Australia, you think? Would you prefer to stay closer to home, or would you be open to opportunities abroad and have another crack at coaching overseas?
Any sort of I think there's no sort of fixation on me where the next journey lays in terms of professional football. It could be overseas, could be at home, could be wherever. I'm not really bothered by where it is. I just got to make sure that the environment is going to challenge me, and that I can value add to the role. And if those tick those boxes, then yeah, I'm happy to jump on that journey.
So the door is open, to overseas. Is it still the attire, long sleeves, white shirts, and brown pants all the time?
These days. Getting a bit older now, so it's a bit colder over here in the time that we play football. So overcoats is definitely a feature on the sideline, but I'm always known to be the best dressed coach. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I'm so disappointed, Jing, whenever I see like these little snippets on like whatever social media, and he's in like a coat, and I'm so disappointed. I'm like, I've got to see a 3-piece or something. Like, he's just, I can't be dealing with these like boring coats. So, like, I need to see some flashy suits. Otherwise, it's just not Dave Perkovic. But no, I definitely, it's absolutely true. You're definitely one of the sharpest dressed coaches on the sideline back in the UFL days. So if you didn't take home any real silverware, you were always the best dressed guy on the sideline. You can take that award home with you.
Some for the trophy.
Brilliant.
Oh, it's been an incredible chat.
I would love another opportunity to have a crack overseas. At the same time, I would love a crack to coach in the A-League as well. So whatever comes up, wherever it may be, I would look into those opportunities.
Man, it's going to be interesting to see what is the next step for David Perkovic. It's been cool hanging out and getting an opportunity to catch up. It's been over an hour now that we've been talking. It just flew by. Anything else that we missed out on? Anything else you'd like to say, Dave?
Yeah, look, I follow Philippine football very closely since I've come back, so I know everything that's happening there. I watch it with a very close eye, and I think I will do for the rest of my life because I hold it close to my heart, my experience there, and I continuously watch the Azkals. I watch the league wherever I can. And obviously, a lot's changed since I've left Shores as well. So, continually seeing that journey of Philippine football. It's taking left turns, right turns here and there, and I'm hoping that we, like I said earlier, Australia is having very similar challenges here as well in terms of which way is the best way forward. But if good people like yourselves are trying to steer the direction of football, then I think it's going to end up in a good place.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Just before we go, I just want to say huge thanks for you for coming on the show today and giving us insights onto your time that you had here, and obviously giving us an update on the Australian football scene as a whole. But more for me, one of the things, having gone from, and at the time I was even transitioning probably more from a player into a coach even while you were there, and one of the things I really learned from you is how important it is to have a clear philosophy, have a clear idea on how you want to play the game, and really stick to your beliefs. Because if you do have a real sense of how you think the game should be played, then, and you're unwavering in that belief, it transmits and it resonates throughout the team. And I think if you look back on the time that we had there, although we can't take much solace in the fact that we didn't pick up any silverware, but the football that we played was the embodiment of how you thought the game should be played, and that I think a lot of times that's overlooked when you're a coach. Would you want to win something playing an ugly style of football? Some people will be very happy doing that, and that's their own philosophy, right? And there's nothing against that. If winning is the be all and end all, then that's fine. But there are so many teams. I look at like the Dutch 74-78 team that will be forever synonymous as one of the greatest teams of all time. Never won a World Cup.
Yes.
Never won a World Cup. My kid's trying to break into the room.
No, I agree with you. I don't think.
I think it's really important, isn't it, that you have that sort of philosophy, that outlook, and if you win with that, that's massive. That's an incredible achievement. But I think sometimes even the best teams in the world don't often win the big trophies. But as long as their style of play is in keeping with the philosophy of the coach, or in keeping with the philosophy of the country, I think that's also really, really important.
I think why that is important is that having a style of play is not just to say, I want to be different. It's because I believe the only way I could succeed as a coach is that way. I believe that I get better results by coaching that way because I know that way inside out. So if you should always coach for success. However that looks like. And like you mentioned, some teams it might be direct, some might be always reactive to the opposition, and then you have alternate ways. But definitely I was quite proud that, looking back at my time in the Philippines and at Kaya, I don't think the country saw that style of football before I arrived, and it kind of opened up to what is possible, that other things are possible. And obviously to see some of the players go on to do have some great achievements, whether that be still playing or coaching, like yourself. If I had a small part to play in their journey, in becoming a better human being and better football person, then I take extreme pride in that.
I always enjoyed getting the opportunity to speak to you after matches. I used to cover all the games, which is, quite a long day. And whenever there was a match,
I'm a little bit calmer now.
Yeah. From the afternoons all the way to the evening, and I always, whenever I knew that there was going to be a Kaya match, and then I'd get a chance to speak to David afterwards, it'd be a nice, eloquent chat, sometimes a fiery chat, but I always enjoyed the opportunity to be able to have some sort of substance to take with me rather than just generic answers and playing to the middle, which was what a lot of the coaches were doing. So, I always look forward to having the opportunity to speak with you today. No different, of course. Always fun and a learning experience for myself to be able to exchange with you. So, thanks for the time.
Football's an entertainment industry, and sometimes we go, as coaches, we forget that. And I tried to make my team play an entertaining brand of style of football to watch. And same with interviews and things like that. I want to get a good insight to what it is like instead of just being politically correct. So
I wish people would take that same line, It gets a bit drab sometimes, you know what I mean? So it'd be nice to stoke some flames from time to time. Definitely needs it here in the Philippines, I would say. People need more reason to follow the game. All right. Thanks for the time, David. Appreciate it. Hope things are going well over there in Australia. And we look forward to hopefully following along as you guys open up next week to get back onto the training pitch. We're just hoping that we get an opportunity to do the same thing soon.
This forced time off has been a struggle for us all football people. So everyone's eagerly anticipating to get back onto the pitch.
David Perkovic on Twitter, on Instagram as well, is it?
Yes.
For people who want to follow along?
Yes.
Easily followable and quite active as well. So you guys will get an opportunity to follow along and see how things are going in the world of football in Australia. All right. Chris, anything else?
No, I just want to say huge thanks to Dave making the time to speak to us. I know he's an avid listener of the show, so great to finally get him on. It's been a great chat. Thanks for giving us so much information and reminiscing about some of those fond memories, namely my goals. I appreciate that the most. So, as always,
later.
I will. I'll tee you up for a couple in the next one. All right. But no, thanks a lot, Dave. We really appreciate it. You're a good man. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you guys enjoyed the episode, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcasts. Check us out on social media. It's Across the Line on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram. We'll catch you guys next time for the next Football Friday. Thanks for watching.